SummerSlam is right around the corner. But if you've heard me talk wrestling before, you know that my era was the golden one. Welcome to Carved in Stone. I'm your host, Shawn Chabam, and today I will be sculpting my Mount Rushmore of SummerSlam matches of the golden era. I consider the golden era WrestleManias 3 to 10 because that's when I was most into it. That puts us at 1987 to 1994. I believe I did watch SummerSlam 94 live on pay-per-view, but I really didn't care too much about the show by that time. If I recall correctly, I watched it at my neighbor's house. The pay-per-view started glitching, and I didn't even care because I just wasn't into it anymore. But let's get into some matches from when I was into it. First up, SummerSlam 1991. Intercontinental Champion Mr. Perfect against the challenger Bret Hitman Hart. A spectacular match between two incredible technical wrestlers. If you're familiar with Bret Hart's shoot interviews, you know that he never holds back from criticizing his peers. Mr. Perfect, Curt Hennig, is one of the only guys I have never heard Bret say a negative word about. While Hart was the winner, capturing his first WWE singles title in the process, I do believe the number one star of this matchup was Mr. Perfect. And that's taking nothing away from the Hitman. He was great too, but Perfect was battling a severe back injury at the time and almost had to pull out of the event. His injury was so severe. However, he pulled through, putting Bret over, and in the process, put on an absolute classic. I went back and watched this, trying to see anything Perfect might have held back on because of his injury, and I came up with nothing. The consummate pro, Perfect looked to be in top health and shape. Like I said, these were two unbelievable technical wrestlers, but it was more than just takedowns and mat moves. They mixed amateur and professional wrestling together to create a beautiful match. I never understood why Coach, real name John Tolos, was needed in Mr. Perfect's corner. After Bobby the Brain Heenan went full-time to the announce table, Coach began managing Perfect. Back then, managers were oftentimes mouthpieces for wrestlers who didn't have good mic skills. Perfect had perfect mic skills. Coach barely even spoke. He just blew a whistle. That was dumb. Honestly, Perfect was over just fine before Heenan managed him too, but having the Brain in your corner in the golden era was a pretty good indicator that you were top competition. Perfect almost left the match, but Hart wouldn't allow him to do so and dragged him back into the ring. When Perfect gained the upper hand, he put his finishing maneuver, the Perfect Plex, on Hart, but Hart kicked out. The Hitman wasn't the first to kick out of this move, but there weren't many who did. That list included the likes of Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior to give you an idea of the company Hart was in. Perfect ended up surrendering to the sharpshooter to end the match. I feel like submissions were fairly rare in title matches back then. It was usually a pinfall. I think that goes to show what a pro Perfect was, that he was even willing to put Hart over with a submission. Bret would later go on to capture the heavyweight title on a submission from Ric Flair, although that match had its issues that have been talked about to death, and it occurred on a house show. The Perfect v Bret contest may have been the best SummerSlam match ever. It was also the first time I remember seeing Bret's parents, Stu and Helen, in attendance at a WWE event. I'm sure it wasn't the first, but it's the first time I recall them being mentioned, and they'd go on to become somewhat regular fixtures during big matches for Bret. You know, I make it a point to catch every WrestleMania eventually, but I can't say the same for SummerSlam. That said, of all the SummerSlam matches that I have watched, I think Perfect versus the Hitman is my favorite. On to the next reveal. And I've got to tell you, if Shawn Michaels was Mr. WrestleMania, then Bret Hart was Mr. SummerSlam. The main event from SummerSlam 1992, Bret Hitman Hart unsuccessfully defended the Intercontinental Championship against hometown hero, the British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith, in front of 80,000 fans at Wembley Stadium. I didn't care for Davey Boy too much as a singles competitor. I enjoyed him much more as a tag team partner to the Dynamite Kid. That said, this was a phenomenal match. I'm not going to get into Bret's fight with his sister, Davey's widow, Diana. I'm aware of it, but I want to talk about the match. Being that SummerSlam was in England, I always thought Davey would end up winning, but this still managed to be very impressive. However, I was unaware of Bret's immense popularity across the pond, and apparently Davey's victory wasn't as much of a slam dunk as I thought it was, according to some accounts. If you go back and watch the match while listening to the crowd, though, they clearly had Davey's back in this one, as Vince McMahon noted on commentary. When Bret got the upper hand, as well as when he was first introduced, you can hear a significant amount of booing. Bret alleges that Davey was difficult to get a hold of for reasons you can find elsewhere in the days leading up to the match, and Smith confessed to forgetting the whole match as they locked up, forcing Bret to call the match on the fly. If that's true, Bret did an amazing job because the bout never missed a beat. As I said, I didn't care for Davey's solo career too much, so for me to list a match of his without Dynamite Kid is saying a lot. Although I do think the majority of the credit goes to the Hitman, regardless of whether or not Davey forgot the match. I really just think Bret was the superior wrestler. When I went back and watched this, I looked for indicators on Davey somehow signaling to Bret or talking to Bret to see the legitimacy of Bret's claims, and I honestly didn't see any. I was particularly looking as closely as the camera would allow during rest moves like chin locks. But as I said, I think Bret carried this match regardless. You see the more athletic removers like go-behinds and leapfrogs done by Bret, while Davey relied on pure power. The crowd was on the edge of their seats the entire match. It was a back-and-forth affair as Diana was often shown displaying concern for both her husband and for her brother. As with most great matches, it was a seesaw battle with both competitors looking like they had the match in the bag at different junctures. The Hitman even kicked out after the Bulldog's power slam, while Bulldog escaped the sharpshooter, albeit by getting to the ropes. The match ended with Davey falling knees on shoulders on top of Bret during a sunset flip attempt for a pinning move. I love those sudden endings. I thought it was a great finish to a very competitive and entertaining bout. I don't recall how the match came to be in the storyline. In real life, Bret actually pitched the idea. It was well documented leading up to the bout that the two were brothers-in-law, even though I don't think it had ever been mentioned when they were feuding in the tag team ranks. It was promoted as a family feud, but it was nothing compared to what Bret and his brother Owen would come up with a few years later. Third is the only tag team match on the mountain today, and guess who was part of it? That's right, it was Mr. SummerSlam. SummerSlam 1990, the tag team champions Demolition versus the Hart Foundation, Bret Hitman Hart and Jim the Anvil Neidhart. This was at the Philadelphia Spectrum, and this is the only pay-per-view I ever attended. It was 2 out of 3 falls. This is when the WWE was transitioning Axe out of the fold, and Demolition came to the ring as Smash and Crush, as only 2 members of Demolition were allowed to be at ringside, but we all knew Axe was still lurking. McMahon tried selling the fact that the ref would be confused later on by saying it was almost impossible to tell Axe and Smash apart. It wasn't. I liked Crush much better when he was repackaged as a singles competitor. He just looked out of place to me in Demolition. He was a powerhouse like Axe and Smash, but because I was so used to the original 2, I wasn't a fan of Demo Crush. Bret looked great as always in the first fall, nearly pinning Smash as he worked on both Demolition members single-handedly as Neidhart was hurt outside the ring. Demolition regained control thanks to Crush dropping a leg on the back of Hart's head during a pin attempt. Crush covered Bret to end the first fall, giving Demolition the 1-0 lead. The Hart Foundation came back in fall 2, winning by disqualification when Crush jumped on top of the referee while Smash was being pinned. I have an issue with that I will talk about in a minute. Predictably, Axe showed up for the third fall. He hid under the ring until it was time for him to come in, pretending to be Smash, which the ref didn't notice, paying off on the setup from McMahon that the two original Demolition members looked alike. With Demolition gaining control thanks to having all three members competing, the Legion of Doom, who wanted a championship match, came down and exposed Demolition's treachery. Hawk tripped up Crush, who was going for the elbow drop from the middle rope, and things got chaotic when the Anvil shoulder tackled Crush, setting him up for a schoolyard trip by the Hitman, who was crouched down behind him to win the third fall and the title. My issue that I mentioned a moment ago with this is more of an observation than a complaint. I don't know if it still works this way in WWE, but back then, they seemed to change certain rules based on what was convenient to the storyline or how they wanted things to play out. Remember how the Hart Foundation's first win in the 2 out of 3 falls contest was a DQ? As we all know, the title doesn't change on a disqualification. But it was 2 out of 3 falls, so maybe that's okay, right? Well, the storyline was for the Hart Foundation to win the belts. So yes, that's okay. However, on a Saturday night's main event a couple years prior, the Hart Foundation, then heels, retained the titles against the British Bulldogs in a 2 out of 3 falls contest the exact same way. The Bulldogs defeated the Harts in 2 straight falls, fall number 1 by disqualification, and fall number 2 by pinfall. After the pin, the crowd went crazy, understandably thinking they just saw a title change. McMahon was praising the new champs, then a snickering Jesse the Body Ventura announced he got to play spoiler and the belts wouldn't be changing hands due to the first fall being a DQ. So why the rule change at SummerSlam? It was just what they wanted to do. Going back to having attended this event, there's a really great wrestling channel, Wrestling with Regret, where the host, Brian Zane, reviewed SummerSlam 1990, and he pointed out that there was a lot of backstage stuff, lots of promos, and he thought that the live crowd must have been bored to death while that stuff was occurring. I don't remember thinking that at all. It was a different time back then. We weren't attached to phones and could comfortably sit there and wait patiently. I had a blast. Watching it back now, though, I do see Zane's point. It was a lot of promos. My final selection will be the only one that doesn't include Bret Hart. But before I get to that, let me explain the absence of the Bret Hart versus Owen Hart cage match at the 94 SummerSlam. I explained earlier I really wasn't into it anymore at this time, so it doesn't make it, even though looking back, they did put on a great show. An honorable mention goes to the main event of the inaugural SummerSlam. That was SummerSlam 1988. The Mega Powers Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage against the Mega Bucks, the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase, and Andre the Giant, officiated by Jesse the Body Ventura. While Andre's health wasn't completely deteriorated by this time, he was far past his prime, and DiBiase carried this match for the Mega Bucks, even taking both finishers from the Mega Powers. You may remember that Miss Elizabeth, as a way to distract and give the Mega Powers time to recover, climbed up onto the apron and removed her skirt. Superstar Billy Graham was hilarious on commentary. "She took off her dress!" No, she didn't. You see more skin at the beach. But it was humorous and a great main event to the first Summer Spectacular. The final reveal is from 1989. Intercontinental Champion Ravishing Rick Rude taking on the Ultimate Warrior. It's kind of crazy that the Warrior, who was not known for putting on great matches, got a match on both the WrestleMania and SummerSlam Golden Era mountains. That said, he had 2 amazing opponents, Randy Savage at WrestleMania 7 and Rude at SummerSlam 89. Rude had defeated Warrior earlier that year for the strap at WrestleMania, thanks in large part to his interfering manager, Bobby the Brain Heenan, who held Warrior's leg on a pinfall. The SummerSlam match was Warrior's revenge. In the weeks leading up to SummerSlam, various members of the Heenan family had tried to take Warrior out, but Warrior consistently prevailed. The two put on an awesome show, trading the advantage until Rowdy Roddy Piper, who was often at odds with Heenan, showed up at ringside. As Rude posed, showing off to Piper, Piper mooned Rude by flipping up his kilt, distracting the Ravishing One. The Warrior then went on the offensive assault until pinning Rude to regain the title. Ventura said the Warrior should cut the belt in half and give half to Piper. The Body always cracked me up with his mental gymnastics to support his hypocrisy in favor of the heels. When Heenan interfered at WrestleMania 5, Rude outsmarted the Warrior. But when Piper did it at SummerSlam, it was bull, and Warrior should have to share the title. And you know what? I'm going to throw in another Warrior match as the final honorable mention. SummerSlam 1992, champion Macho Man Randy Savage and the Warrior for the title. Ric Flair and Mr. Perfect threw the match into a tizzy by insisting Perfect would be in one man's corner without saying who, only for him to not show up at the beginning of the match. Eventually, Flair and Perfect came down, disrupting the match on behalf of both individuals, and ultimately the Warrior won the bout by contest, so the title didn't change hands. It was a good match, although not on par with their WrestleMania 7 contest, and countouts in a big title match always made me feel like we were being cheated as fans a little. That said, at least the Ultimate Warrior didn't celebrate like a hero returning home from war, like Lex Luger did the following year when he defeated Yokozuna by countout. Just like in my Golden Era WrestleMania episode, the Intercontinental Champions dominated the SummerSlam list. In that particular era, it was the workhorse belt. That's not to say good matches were never put on by world champs, but the IC champs were incredible workers back then. I hope you enjoy SummerSlam 2026 if you're watching it. I won't be, but you do you. If you enjoy the current WWE, don't apologize for it. I don't apologize for not liking it. To recap my Mount Rushmore of Golden Era SummerSlam matches: Bret Hitman Hart defeating Mr. Perfect for the Intercontinental title at SummerSlam 91. The British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith defeating Bret Hart for the Intercontinental title at SummerSlam 92. The Hart Foundation defeating Demolition in a 2 out of 3 falls match for the tag titles at SummerSlam 90. And the Ultimate Warrior defeating Ravishing Rick Rude for the Intercontinental title at SummerSlam 1989. Thank you as always for joining me today. If you haven't yet, I'd really appreciate a like and a subscription. Wrestling episodes aren't constant, but I do make them from time to time, and they are on their own playlist called Stone Slams on my channel, if that's what you're particularly interested in. I will see you next time. Go Birds.